Welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday, a lectionary podcast from St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. I'm John Kennedy.
And I'm Rob Schwartz.
And today we are, if you're watching, you'll see that we're in a new location. We are in Reverend Elizabeth's office. I promise we do have her permission to be here, but we are here while some very important lighting work and rewiring and so on is being done in the church, and this will be our location for the next bit.
Yeah,
right?
St. Mark's is currently a people who have walked in darkness, so hopefully before you know it, they'll see a great light.
Exactly, and Isaiah, that language, of course, coming from Isaiah, will figure into our discussion today, which is, of course, for August 24th, 2025, Proper 16, or the 11th Sunday after Pentecost in year C, and our passage is Luke chapter 13, verses 10 through 17, and in it, Jesus heals a woman has been bent over for 18 years, and I don't know about you, but I think about my posture a lot these days because I'm always holding a phone. It's not always so good, so I feel like this passage really speaks to me. Let's hear what it has to say. This is Luke chapter 13, verses 10 through 17. Now Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things he was doing.
I love a happy ending.
Yes. Once in a while we get those with these gospel passages. It works especially well if you don't keep reading on.
That's right.
Just a lot of, ups and downs in the narrative, but of course we all know it ends with resurrection. So we're in the same section of Luke we've been in for a while. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. This is a bit of a travelogue. Luke is drawing from various material from Mark and from Q, as it's known. And this is one of these stories, but this is one of these stories that only appears in Luke. So, perhaps worth special attention, especially given some of the dynamics going on in it. What strikes you as exciting or noteworthy here?
Well, so what's cool is, I think, let's start off with a little detective work. Anytime you're reading these things, all these different passages don't just happen in isolation. A lot of the times there's a lot of clues, kind of where things are going, of what comes before, what comes after. So I brought something for this. And if you're just listening to this, you can't see much. But listen, I busted out my special Sherlock Holmes gear for this. So this way we're ready to do some detective work.
I wasn't ready for that.
You listen, I'm full of surprises, John. So just before this reading, we've got a story, and we talked about this back in episode 196, where it talks about Pilate mixing the blood of the Galileans with the sacrifices, and then there's that story about the Tower of Siloam that falls on 18 people and kills them, and this whole thing is that suffering doesn't equal sinfulness, right? All these people suffered in horrible ways, but it doesn't mean that they were actually guilty of something. So that's kind of where Jesus is getting in that story. Following that, we've got this story about the fig tree, and the parable, and the man just wants to cut down the fig tree, and then he's told, wait, let me just give it, give me 1 year. I'll tend to it. I'll give it fertilizer and all that. And then let's see where it's at. This one's kind of about mercy. And on the other side of the parable that we're talking about today, Jesus says the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed that grows into a tree for sheltering birds, or like yeast that leavens bread for provision and fellowship. So on the other side of today's reading, there's this story about how something seemingly insignificant can bring in and help transform the kingdom, bring forth the kingdom of God in transformative ways. And so a lot of these things kind of hint at where today's story, some of the things it might be teaching, where it might be leading us. And one other thing, before I take off my fancy schmancy hat here, in chapter 4, back in chapter 4, I should say, we had the passage where Jesus is reading kind of his inaugural address in a way, as we said, where he kind of reads from the scripture and says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, sent me to proclaim release to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And for those following the pod, that was back in episode 187. And here we are on 218, so it's been a little bit since we've covered some of these things. But that very much says a lot about Jesus, and it says a lot about what Jesus is getting to here today. So
Okay.
there's a lot to chew on. Sorry.
Yeah, wow. And I thought that hat was maybe Charlie's or something. Charlie is Reverend Elizabeth's son.
He may be asking me for it now.
Yeah, maybe if he watches the podcast. So, wow. Well, I guess the thing I will pick up on for now is the theme of liberation in Luke's gospel, which is, as you said, programmatic of how Jesus frames his ministry. I'm amazed that I guess it's been 20-something weeks since that passage came up. It still, in some ways, feels pretty fresh for me. I preached a sermon on that passage that some people had some feelings about.
That's true.
But that was back in January. So here we are in August now. And so in that passage, as you recapped very, aptly, Jesus says his ministry is about good news and liberation for the captives, for the oppressed, and so on. And here he is putting that into action, not at all for the first time, but this is our story for the day. And we see that language very clearly in the passage. He says, "Ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, who has been bound by Satan for 18 years, be set free from bondage?" And then earlier he says, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." So freedom is clearly front of mind for Jesus as he encounters this woman and understands his activity here, and for Luke as he tells the story. And very interesting to think about freedom from and healing from a physical ailment as being a part of the picture here. It seems to me that the view that Jesus has of the coming of the kingdom of God, and that is taken by the authors of the synoptic gospels, in particular Matthew, Mark, and Luke, is of God's ways and God's will coming to bear on earth as in heaven. And that's in the Lord's Prayer.
Right.
And that things on earth are not often in accord with God's ways and God's will. And I think this is sort of an interpretive key for understanding a lot of the collisions between Jesus, who is love, who is, we call him the Prince of Peace, etc., all about healing and reconciliation. I think this is an interpretive key for understanding why Jesus so often clashes with the ways of the world and the systems of the world and so on, because the world is not lined up with the will of God and the peace of God and the shalom of God and so on. So it's not just what we might typically think of in the present day as things that need to be addressed, let's say, by the ministry of the church or by people who seek to do good. Things like poverty and social exclusion, like, yes, Jesus deals with those things, but also physical illness itself is seen to be a result of the workings of Satan, which, I mean, we all hate physical illness, right? I mean, I know that there's not going to be any divided opinions about that. It's a terrible and very often tragic fact of our lives, but I think we're not always in the habit of seeing it as the result of evil.
Although interestingly enough, like, you know, this is 2,000 years ago, whatever, but there are still people today who do kind of hold that train of thought sometimes, like, oh, what did you do wrong in life, you know, to deserve this kind of thing happening to you and things like that.
Sure.
So,
yes.
So, you know, we've come far, but in some ways we haven't always come that far.
Yeah. In this
Not to cut you
passage,
off.
that Jesus is saying this is not the result of the woman being evil. Far from it. It's the result of Satan.
Yes.
So just interesting context but so much more to talk about. Let's talk about the Sabbath. The Sabbath seems to be, I like to do this with these passages. I like to see which words come up the most. And Sabbath is sort of the word based on that analysis of the passage.
Yeah, because I think because I think the whole thing with the healing, a lot of the times that's such the focus because it's like, wow, look what Jesus did and all that. I really think that's just the means of bringing us into the main event here, which is really this debate over the Sabbath that Jesus is having with the leaders here. So I pulled up the reading from Deuteronomy that talks about the Sabbath. And it's interesting because when you look at it, you'll see where both the leaders are coming from and their position on it, but you can also see how Jesus would land at his position. And so it says, observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, or your male or female slave, or your ox or your donkey, or any of your livestock, or the resident alien in your towns, so that your male and female slave may rest as well as you. So before I keep going, you can see why the leaders are like, we shouldn't be doing anything. This is the Sabbath, right? Like the healing, that's why they're kind of pushing back on it. But then here's the part that Jesus, I think, kind of hones in on. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Again, we're getting onto that idea of liberation. The Exodus, the people being freed from Egypt. And so I think for Jesus, that takes, what better way to honor the Sabbath than through liberation by giving, providing this new life for someone.
Right. I mean, Jesus has clashes with authorities throughout the gospel narratives, all four gospels, in regards to the Sabbath and what is acceptable and right to do on the Sabbath and what isn't. And we have another collision between a more, we could say, rigid, legalistic interpretation of the Sabbath, the idea of Sabbath rest, the rule, the law of Sabbath rest, that you take one day out of 7 to rest from your labors, and that's on the one hand that you should literally do like nothing, and on the other hand, Jesus's view of the Sabbath as being for man, not man exclusively, but for humanity. Jesus says, it's the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. And so this sort of slavish adherence to a particular understanding of what rest means can actually be harmful to human well-being and dignity and so on in particular situations. And so Jesus always keeps the spirit of the law in view when discerning how to put it into practice in particular concrete situations. I think Jesus is so good at showing us how to exercise discernment, how to not be held captive to very rigid and narrow readings of certain things. So Jesus is not just dispensing with the whole idea of Sabbath rest, far from it, but he is demonstrating a deeper understanding of it, and it being connected to human dignity and human freedom, and that if somebody is in need of healing, if their human flourishing, if their well-being and so on isn't as it could be, and here is Jesus is there, right? He can heal you. Then that's the thing to do. That is the right thing to do. And it's a question that's still with us, right? The letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, and many Orthodox and Hasidic Jews today still observe the Sabbath in such a way that they don't drive, they don't cook, they don't use electricity, and this creates all sorts of complications, and it gets kind of comical in certain situations. And then there are people of other religious traditions that are more interested in the spirit of the law, and it's an interesting dynamic tension between tradition and the realities of the moment, and so on.
Even as Christians, though those aren't all some of the things we're wrestling with in our own tradition. I think that general message of not getting so rigid, so fixed on the way we do things that we fail to help people, or that we exclude people. It's really looking at what's taking precedence as Jesus is and the leaders are wrestling with here. And so I think we can easily fall into these same habits.
Yeah. Indeed. And before moving on from the question of the Sabbath, and I mentioned, certain traditions of Judaism and how they interpret and observe the Sabbath today. I just want to highlight that Jesus' sensibility is totally presaged in the Hebrew Scriptures, particularly with the passage from Isaiah that is also appointed for this Sunday. If you're following track 2 in the RCL or just the regular Roman Catholic lectionary, it's going to be Isaiah 58, 9b through 14. And this reading, at least, actually, we get more of this reading every Ash Wednesday.
Yeah.
And it is a word from God through Isaiah to the people, really calling out a piety, a sort of religiosity that is so focused on the letter of the law, on the outward observances, on the fasting, on the ceremonies, etc., that it neglects what are truly the weightier matters of the law, the much more important things of justice and mercy, and that being so focused on the outward observance can actually make you quite insensitive to the needs of the poor. And Isaiah was seeing a situation and calling out a situation in which, people who put a great deal of stock in their performance of religiosity, of piety, also, like exploiting their workers, not paying fair wages and things like that. And Isaiah is saying, as long as you're doing that, God doesn't give what about your festivals and your fasting. Get your priorities straight, get your heart straight, open your hands to the poor, and so on. And then God will be with you. And Jesus is just following that spirit.
He's not pulling anything new. So
this is not an Old Testament versus New Testament thing, or a Judaism versus Christianity thing at all. It's different religious sensibilities that we find in every religious tradition colliding with each other.
No, that's true. One thing I liked, if it's all right to move on from just the Sabbath part, this is someone who really wasn't seen in her society, either because of her ailment, because she was a woman in a patriarchal society, so she already didn't, have a lot of the same rights and things as the men did. And again, here she is in this scene on the outside. So she's someone who's kind of been, and her eyes weren't meeting them because she'd been bent over for 18 years. So, people would have had to come down to her level to really look her in the eye to see her. And there's a lot about the power of seeing people and being seen. Fearless Dialogues is the book that I did a lot of work with by Gregory Ellison II. And two things he talks about is when he does these teachings and forums with people, when he first gets up there, he really takes the time to look around at everybody in the audience, and he says, "It is great to finally see you." And he really means it. It's not just a throwaway line like, "Hey, good to see you." And I did that with people when I did this training, and they were like, "Wow, it's good to be seen. Thank you." And you don't necessarily think about that. And another thing he has people do when they're doing this training is called the long, loving look at the real. And I forget how long it is. I want to say it's only like 30 seconds or a minute. I almost want to say a minute. And you have two people sit across from each other and just stare at each other for like a whole minute. And then he asks them, what came up for you? And some people end up in tears while they're doing this because they're like, no one's ever taken the time to really see me on that kind of a level. And the person who's looking and giving their feedback then says, wow, there are so many things I never even noticed about this person. There's this amazing speck in their eye kind of a thing, or these details. So the power, the fact that Jesus here takes the time and sees her and then calls her to him is really powerful. And so as I was reading this, a lot of the stuff from that training and that book just kind of came up for me. And I thought, well, it's important to bring up here because there are so many people who just go unseen in our society.
Yeah. So beautiful and so powerful. Thank you. Should we try that exercise right now?
The people listening are going to be like, is something wrong here?
Yeah. We can just edit it out.
Yeah, so, there you go.
But yeah, no, I've done without that sort of framing around it, but on meditation retreats and so on, I've done that sort of thing with strangers, and it is amazing and powerful, and you feel so vulnerable, but it's a really beautiful thing as well. And all the more significant, right, that Jesus is seeing this woman who has been so, we can imagine, excluded and alone.
Yeah. Not
seen as just a castaway, somebody we can just kind of forget about. That society that Jesus lived in was already so terrible for women to live in, so patriarchal. As you've said, women, for instance, their testimony wasn't valid in any sort of legal proceeding or dispute, and they were often regarded as property rather than as full people. And I mean, that continued for a long time, including into, Christian Europe, and in our marriage liturgy. Currently in the Book of Common Prayer, there's an option for what is known as the giving away of not formally. In the prayer book, it says the presentation of the bride, or more colloquial known as the giving away.
Right.
We tend not to use that anymore. I've done, a good number of weddings. I think only one couple has opted, maybe two has opted to use that. Because even though the language isn't as explicit as this, it's clearly rooted in this idea of the woman as currently the father's property, about to be transferred to the husband.
The husband, yeah.
And so this was the situation for women here. And I say all this because Jesus's relationships with women, his dealings with women, are so significant, so far beyond this story, and particularly in Luke's gospel. If you were to pick one gospel that has the greatest emphasis on social justice and challenging the norms and the hierarchies and the who's in and who's outness of the times, it would be Luke. And Jesus does this so powerfully with women. So anyway, we have this woman here who's just been so cast aside, and Jesus is restoring her dignity. And just one little point on this before handing it back to you, Rob.
Yeah.
Is there's an amazing reversal here. Luke, I mean, all the Gospels are Gospels of reversals, but as I just said, Luke particularly so. There's a particular emphasis on the first will be last and the last will be first. And as it says in the Magnificat, God is casting down the mighty from their thrones and lifting up the lowly, and all of that beautiful, beautiful stuff. So this woman is bent over. It's a posture, even though it's caused by a physical limitation in this case, it's still a posture of being ashamed.
Yeah.
Of being of low standing. It's sort of you cower before. I'm cowering, so people probably can't actually hear me. But that's sort of the effect it has, right? You kind of shrink from the world, or you shrink before other people, and this is this woman's posture. It's a posture of shame in some basic way. And the leader of the synagogue, this man of great standing and importance, in the community and all that, he is indignant because Jesus has, in his view, broken the Sabbath law of doing work on the Sabbath by healing this woman. But after Jesus calls him on the carpet, it is he and all of Jesus's opponents gathered here, all these people Jesus calls hypocrites, they who are put to shame. So Jesus just totally reverses the whole situation.
Yep.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And there's that hypocrite word again, as we were saying the other day. That's a favorite rebuke of Jesus's.
Yes.
And another interesting thing about this woman and her interaction with Jesus is he calls her a daughter of Abraham. Mm-hmm. There are only two people who get this kind of similar title in Luke's gospel. This woman is a daughter of Abraham, as he says, and Zacchaeus is called a son of Abraham. These are both people who are kind of looked at as outsiders in their society, right? Zacchaeus was the tax collector.
Yes.
It was definitely not on the most popular list.
No.
And this woman, as we're saying, is kind of on the periphery for a lot of in her society. And yet here's Jesus always kind of extending widening the circle of who's included and reminding us just how wide that circle is in God's kingdom. And even back early on in Luke in chapter 3, John the Baptist says that if people don't heed God, God will raise up children to Abraham from the stones instead. Mm-hmm. So, he's saying, well, God will always find people to be in this.
Yeah. No, love that you're bringing in Abraham, as of course Jesus does in the passage. And Jesus is, in some ways, as you've noted, not necessarily reimagining, but widening the circle of who's really, an heir of the covenant, of the promise made to Abraham. And that makes me think of just perhaps one final point.
Yeah.
You can chime in if you have something to say on top of that. But I think this helps us kind of synthesize so much of what this passage is about, because when God makes the covenant with Abraham, he says, I will bless you and make you the father of a great nation, so that through your offspring, the whole world may be blessed. And this is the basis for a little saying known among some Christians, blessed to be a blessing. And that is the vocation of the people of God, to receive blessings from God in order to, pay it forward. And therefore, nobody is out of bounds. Nobody is truly an outsider or a foreigner or an enemy. This is a vision in which the whole world is intended to be brought together in the love of God, and to be respected and honored as such. And to the extent that Jesus finds himself in conflict, which he so often does, it's all the time, basically, it is because he is colliding with systems and with people and with groups that for various reasons are opposed to this sort of expansive, inclusive vision of what it is to be the people of God.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that, all these years later, Jesus is still challenging us to really get out of our comfort zone sometimes and wrestle with what it is to be the people of God.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, especially now as with Christian nationalism, there is this sadly seemingly ascendant, at least among some real sectors of our society, ascendant understanding of Christianity as being sort of so blended with national and ethnic identity that it is co-opted to be in the service of looking out for the supposed interests of one group at the expense of and over and against the dignity and well-being and interests of others. And, just leaving politics to the side for a moment, I can just say that's not the gospel.
Yeah.
It's not the gospel.
We're shrinking the circle when we do these things.
Yes. So thank you for listening to us, and hope you like our new space, because we're going to be here for a bit.
Gonna hang here for a bit.
And we hope you like Rob's hat. And we're gonna sign off now.
And a cool little heads up for next week. John and I will not be on the pod, but Father Peter will be on the pod, and Father Justin will be popping on to join him one more time. So stick around for that.
Okay.
Yeah, we recorded that before Father Peter went away. So
we're doing a little time travel here. Anyway, we're going to sign off now so we can do that staring exercise. Maybe you can find somebody to do that with too, and let us know how it went. Just kidding. But always a pleasure to be in communion with you, to be in conversation with you. So let us know what you're thinking, and we will see you next time. Peace be with you.